Have you ever felt like life had lost its meaning? Like everything you've been through left only invisible scars that no one can see anymore? I thought my story ended as soon as the war ended, that I would return home, and everything would be fine. But that wasn't the case. Inside, I was still trapped on the battlefield, hearing the sounds of explosions in my head, waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, my heart racing. And it was in this state, broken inside and without hope of repair, that I ended up in a shelter. I thought my life was over after the war, until the day I met an old lady in the shelter. What you're about to discover now may surprise you, because sometimes the transformation we need comes from where we least expect it. I remember the smell of the shelter, a mix of dust, stale coffee, and something that felt like sadness. The silence there was different, heavy, almost suffocating. I sat in a corner, avoiding eye contact as if I wanted to disappear. People passed by, each carrying their own weight, and I thought no one would ever understand mine. But that day, a white-haired woman walked in slowly, leaning on a cane, and it felt like time slowed down when she looked at me. It wasn't just a look of curiosity. It was a look that penetrated my layers, as if she saw everything I was trying to hide. Have you ever had that feeling that someone can see beyond what you show? It's uncomfortable, almost painful, because it exposes what you struggle to bury. But at the same time, it's a silent invitation to be truly seen. Stay with me until the end, because that's where the twist in this story begins. I said nothing, just continued staring at the ground, waiting for her to leave. But she came over, sat beside me, and was silent for a while. A strange silence, not uncomfortable, but rather saying, "I'm here." My body was tense, my heart racing. I was used to dealing with noise, chaos, explosions, but not silence. Silence reminded me of nights on the front line, when everything would stop for a few seconds and you knew something bad was about to happen. Only this time, something good was about to begin. That old lady opened her mouth and said something so simple it seemed unimportant, but each word sank into me as if opening a space where there had been only darkness. She didn't ask me about the war. She didn't ask me for explanations. She simply spoke about the morning, about the sun, about the hope that is reborn each day, even for those who no longer believe in it. It was as if she knew I needed something small, almost invisible, to begin reconnecting with life. As she spoke, I realized I was breathing differently, deeper, less tense. It was as if that shelter, once cold and suffocating, began to transform. Perhaps you felt it too. That moment when something inside you gives a small, almost imperceptible snap, but it changes the course of your thoughts. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of something that would transform my pain into strength. And that's how it all began. That was just the first time she sat next to me. But what happened next is something you need to hear. Each word from that woman seemed to open a crack in a heart I thought was forever locked away. I hadn't realized how hungry I was for a simple gesture of humanity until that moment. Perhaps that's why this story moves me so much, because it reminds me that even at rock bottom, someone can reach out in unexpected ways. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most so far. I'd love to hear if you've experienced something like this, or if you've met someone who changed the course of your life when you least expected it. Reading these stories creates a sense of community, makes us realize we're not alone in our struggles. And if this story has touched you in any way, please like the video. It's a simple gesture, but it goes a long way in spreading this kind of message to others who might need to hear it today. Each like is like a little push for these stories to reach more hearts. Oh, and if you feel like this is the kind of content that inspires you and gives you the strength to keep going, subscribe to the channel. That's how you ensure you'll follow the next installments of this story and other moving stories we tell here. Your participation is what makes this channel grow and reach more people who need hope. As she continued speaking, I realized something inside me was beginning to stir, as if a new seed were being planted. I still had no idea what was about to happen, but I felt this was just the first step in a journey that would transform me forever. The truth is, I didn't choose to carry this weight, but it chose me. Each day of combat left an invisible mark on me, marks no one sees, but which shape every decision I've made since I returned. I was only in my 20s when I enlisted, full of dreams, believing I was doing something bigger than myself. The flag raising, the anthems, the speeches of courage, all of this gave me the strength to carry on. But no one told me that when the war ends abroad, it continues within you. Here in the United States, many talk about war heroes, Veterans Day parades, and appreciations in football stadiums. But giving a standing ovation is easy. What's harder is dealing with the silence that comes afterward, when the crowds leave and you're left alone with your memories. The nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, and it felt like the darkness had come to life. I'd close my eyes and see the faces of the friends who hadn't returned with me, hear their voices calling my name. And then came the guilt, the question that haunted me like a shadow. Why did I return and they didn't? I tossed and turned until the mattress felt like a minefield. Every noise from the street, a car passing, a gate slamming, made me jump as if I were back at the front. During the day, I tried to appear normal. I'd go to the little corner diner where veterans like me gathered to drink black coffee and exchange stories, but I said almost nothing. I watched people smile, talk about work, family, and everything seemed so distant. It was like watching life through the window of a train, watching everything pass by too quickly, unable to get off. This disconnect made me even more trapped in my own head. It was in this state that I ended up at the shelter, not because I was homeless, but because I needed a place where I could disappear, where no one expected anything of me. The shelter smelled of damp wood and burnt coffee, and each person there carried a story no one knew. It was like a warehouse for weary souls, where time seemed to slow down. I spent hours staring at the floor, fiddling with the same plastic cup, not daring to look anyone in the eye. The old lady who appeared that day seemed no different from so many others, but there was something about the way she walked, slow and steady, as if each step were a conscious choice. She sat next to me without asking permission, as if she already knew I needed someone by my side. This disconcerted me. I was used to keeping my distance, to building walls. But this woman, with her white hair tied in a simple bun and an old coat that seemed to have stories of its own, didn't seem willing to leave. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was in that silence, in that first contact, that my true transformation began. What she said that afternoon was more than words. It was like opening a window in a dark room. She didn't talk about war. She didn't ask about battles. She talked about Sunday mornings, about the smell of bread fresh from the oven, about small miracles that happen when we least expect it. And I, who spent nights struggling to banish bad memories, found myself remembering good things. The smell of my mother's apple pie in the fall, the sound of dry leaves in the yard, the laughter at Thanksgiving dinner. It was as if she had given me permission to remember without pain. The impact of this was so great that I couldn't react immediately. It felt like my entire body was relearning how to breathe. My mind, accustomed to chaos, found a moment of calm, and it was then that something changed. A small detail, but one that paved the way for everything that followed. Comment below. I felt that too. I want to know if this feeling of reconnecting with small memories has ever happened to you. In that shelter, the days seemed to blend together. It was as if the clock had stopped, and only the weight of memories continued to flow within me. The morning chill seeped through the cracks in the windows, making me shrink even deeper into the corner where I always sat. I remembered the desert heat, the sweat dripping inside my helmet, the deafening sound of explosions. Now, all I heard was the creaking floorboards, shuffling footsteps, and the distant murmur of voices that seemed to speak of a life that no longer belonged to me. The smell of stale coffee mixed with disinfectant created an eerie sensation, as if each sip I took was a reminder that I was there, trying to stay awake, trying not to be swallowed by the void. It was a noisy solitude, if that makes sense. On the outside, everything was quiet, but inside my head, the noise was constant. Memories came without warning. The flash of a grenade, my companion's scream, the dust covering everything like a blanket of death. I breathed deeply, trying to convince myself that it was behind me, but my body reacted as if I were still on patrol. My shoulders remained tense, my hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. It was exhausting. Sometimes I closed my eyes just to avoid seeing anyone, to avoid feeling the looks of pity or curiosity. There were other men there, some also veterans, but I didn't have the strength to exchange words. It was as if each conversation were an extra weight I couldn't carry. The shelter had yellow, peeling walls, and I kept counting the cracks in them, as if that would distract me. But even the cracks seemed shaped like scars, as if the building also had its own story of pain to tell. I had lost track of days and nights. In winter, when the snow fell outside, the muffled sound of flakes hitting the window seemed to mock my apathy. Children laughed in the park across the street, and their joy seemed to belong to another planet. I wondered if I would ever laugh like that again. Worst of all was the feeling that no one really saw what was happening to me. In the newspaper, They talked about numbers, about statistics on homeless veterans, about reintegration programs, but no one talked about what happens inside when you feel like you no longer have a place in the world. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this moment of despair is what changes everything. It's at rock bottom that we see things that would otherwise go unnoticed. I began to notice details. The sound of the heater occasionally sputtering, the late afternoon light streaming through the window and illuminating dust particles in the air, the way a woman stopped by every day to drop off clothes for donation, always smiling, even without knowing who would receive them. These little glimpses into life kept me grounded in reality, albeit fragilely. It was as if every detail was a sign that there was still something there for me. And this left me conflicted because at the same time I felt like surrendering to the void. A part of me wanted to fight. The impact of this conflict was so great that at times I felt my chest ache. I needed a reason to keep going. I needed something to remind me that my journey wasn't over. And it was at this point that the unexpected happened. Something I couldn't foresee. Something that would change the course of everything. Right there. I've already felt this cold inside. I want to see if you also understand what it's like to be present but feel like you don't belong anywhere. That afternoon, when the shelter was quieter than usual, she entered. It wasn't sudden, nor in a way that drew attention. It was as if she had always been a part of the place, as if the chair she sat in had been waiting for her for years. A woman with white hair tied in a simple bun, wearing a worn but clean coat and shoes that looked like she'd walked many miles. The curious thing was that, even with all her simplicity, there was something about her that changed the entire atmosphere. It seemed the air became lighter. The sound of her footsteps had a different rhythm, almost measured, as if each movement were intentional. She carried a faded cloth bag and sat down slowly, as if acknowledging the weight of time but not allowing herself to be crushed by it. There was a warmth in the way she arranged her coat on her lap, as if preparing for a long conversation or simply to be present. I watched from the corner of my eye, trying to figure out who this woman was. At the shelter, no one really asked questions. Everyone had their own reasons for being there, and we learned to respect each other's silence. But she seemed unconcerned about the invisible rules of that place. Her gaze was what caught my attention most. It wasn't pity, nor was it judgmental. It was a look full of stories, as if she'd seen the best and the worst of the world, and yet she'd still chosen to smile at him. It was the kind of look you only find in people who've survived storms no one could have imagined, and somehow that look made me uncomfortable. I was used to being invisible, to going unnoticed, but that woman seemed to see right through me. She didn't say anything right away, just stood there, staring into space, but in a way that seemed to be looking inward. It was as if she carried a secret, a hidden truth that I wasn't yet ready to hear. It made me uneasy. Did she know something about me? Had she been through something similar? Here in the United States, many people of her generation have memories of wartime. Fathers who fought in World War II, brothers who went to Vietnam, sons who served in Iraq or Afghanistan. Perhaps she had her own collection of invisible scars. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it was at that moment that something began to stir within me. There was a strange magnetism in that silent presence, something that pulled me out of the hole I'd been trapped in. I found myself noticing the small details, the way she smoothed the fabric of her coat with her hands, the wrinkles around her eyes that seemed to tell stories of laughter and tears, the slight sway of her head as if listening to a song only she knew. It was impossible to ignore that energy. My mind tried to resist. I didn't want to open up, didn't want to let anyone poke at the wounds I was still trying to hide, but at the same time, there was something comforting about that scene. It was like seeing an old photograph, something familiar you can't explain. The impact of that encounter was silent but profound. The shelter, which had previously seemed so cold, suddenly became a place where something new could begin. Right there, I felt this presence. I want to know if you've ever had that feeling of meeting someone who changes everything just by being there, without saying a word. She didn't ask permission to sit next to me. She simply settled in, as if the space were already hers, and remained there for a few moments, saying nothing. This silence was unlike any other I'd ever known. It wasn't heavy, nor uncomfortable. It was a silence filled with presence, as if she were saying, "I see you." I stared at the floor, trying to ignore it, but I felt her warmth beside me, a presence so unexpected it seemed to break the ice that had kept me isolated from the world. When I finally looked up, she smiled. It was a small smile, but filled with a calm that seemed impossible for someone living in a place like that. It wasn't a smile of pity, but of recognition, as if she knew exactly what was going on inside me. That's when she spoke, and what she said was simple, almost banal. "It's a cold day today, isn't it?" But that phrase struck a strange chord in my chest. I just nodded, unsure of what to say, but something stirred inside. It was as if someone had turned on a dim light in a dark room. I hadn't expected such a common phrase to have such an impact, but it did. For the first time in a long time, I felt like continuing the conversation. I asked where she was from, and she replied with the name of a small town in the countryside, where everyone knows everyone, as she said, chuckling softly. That laugh disarmed me. It was a light laugh, almost shy, but full of life, and I realized it had been a long time since I'd heard a laugh like that. The shelter was a place full of tired voices, of laments and murmurs, and that sound felt like a relief. It was as if someone had opened a window to let in air. I continued listening, and she began to tell me about her routine, about how she liked to go to the shelter every now and then, to bring clothes and talk to people. She didn't seem to be there out of charity. She seemed to be there because she believed that every conversation could change something. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because at that moment something I hadn't expected began. That woman, with a simple gesture, was changing my mindset. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was listening to someone without rushing to leave. There was a hidden truth in that encounter. I didn't need to tell my whole story to be accepted. I didn't need to prove anything. It was enough to be there. This revelation was so powerful that I felt different even without having moved. It was as if the journey of transformation had taken its first silent step. From then on, time seemed to flow differently. I found myself looking at her face, at the wrinkles that seemed like maps of a life full of challenges, at her hands that, despite her age, moved steadily. It was impossible not to imagine what decisions she had already made in life, what battles she had faced, and somehow that gave me courage. If she could carry all this and still smile, perhaps I could too. That encounter seemed small to the outsider, but to me it was like a revelation, a change of scenery. It was the beginning of a transformation that was about to become visible. I had no idea that this would be the first of many conversations, but that night, when I returned to my corner of the shelter, something felt different. The place still smelled of dust and stale coffee, still cold, but less stifling. It was as if a door had opened inside me, and I wanted to see what lay beyond. Leave a comment below. I felt this change. I want to see if you've also experienced this moment when something simple, like a smile or a word, started to transform everything inside. She returned the next day at the same time and sat in the same spot, as if picking up where she'd left off. She didn't ask me anything right away, just stood there, rummaging through her cloth bag and pulling out a piece of unfinished knitting. The soft click of needles broke the silence of the shelter, and somehow the sound became almost hypnotic. I realized I'd been waiting for it, waiting for her presence, and when she finally spoke, her words didn't come as an intrusive question or ready-made advice. They came as stories. Stories about growing up on a Midwestern farm, about the harsh winters when the whole family would gather around the wood stove to keep warm. She spoke simply, but every detail she shared seemed chosen to remind me of something I'd forgotten. At one point she said something that made me stop and reflect. We don't choose the storms we face, but we do choose whether to let our hearts be drenched or whether to seek shelter. That phrase echoed in my mind. I was sitting in a shelter, hiding from the world, and I'd never considered that perhaps that was just a physical place, that the true shelter I needed to build was within myself. She seemed to know this. As she spoke, she didn't look down at me, nor did she give me that expression of someone trying to fix someone. It was just a conversation, but it carried a weight of truth that hit me deeply. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because it was during this sequence of conversations that I began to notice a real transformation taking place within me. She spoke of losses she had experienced, of difficult decisions she had to make. She said she lost a son in a car accident when he was only 19. Her voice shook a little at this point, but she continued, saying that it had nearly destroyed her. I had to choose between dying inside or continuing to live for him, she said, and that sentence was like a punch in the gut. I felt like she was speaking to me that those words were exactly what I needed to hear. She also talked about small gestures that change everything, like the neighbor who appeared on her porch every morning to have coffee with her, even when she didn't feel like talking. That's how I realized that life always finds a way to pull us back to itself, she said, smiling. These stories were more than memories. They were hidden lessons, revelations that fit together in my mind like puzzle pieces. Little by little, the guilt that consumed me began to give way to something else, a desire to get up, to not waste the life I still had. The afternoons at the shelter began to take on a new meaning. I went there not just to escape the world but to listen. Each encounter seemed to open a new window within me. It was as if she were guiding me on a journey of rebuilding, brick by brick, word by word. The impact of these conversations was so profound that sometimes when I returned to my room, I found myself smiling to myself, something I hadn't done in a long time. It was as if I were remembering what it was like to be human again. She had a way of mixing wisdom with humor. She told funny stories about her youth, about small-town dances, about meeting her husband at a summer fair, and laughed at herself when recalling small embarrassments. I realized she wasn't just telling me about the past. She was showing me that even after losing so much, it was still possible to laugh. It was a revelation. I had forgotten what it felt like to truly laugh, without the fear that the memory of something bad would come right back to erase the moment. Over time, I started talking too. At first, just a few sentences, then a few stories. I told her about my companions, the places I'd been, the days I thought I wouldn't return alive, and she listened to everything without interrupting, without offering her opinion, just listening. It made me realize I'd been carrying all this alone for too long. There was a relief in being able to get it out, as if each word lifted a weight from my chest. And it was in this exchange that something greater than simple conversations was born. A connection was born. She wasn't there to save me, and I wasn't there to be rescued. We were simply sharing the burden, each carrying a little of the other's burden. This was what gave me the strength to keep coming back, day after day. With each conversation, each laugh, and each shared silence, a new part of me was rebuilt. Write in the comments. These words touched me. I want to know if you've ever heard something from someone that seemed to hit you at exactly the right moment, as if it had been said to you. I wanted to believe those conversations were helping me, but something inside me seemed to fight against any sign of relief. It was as if my mind had grown accustomed to living on the battlefield, even when I was miles away from it. There was a part of me that refused to let go of the weight it carried. I felt that if I let go of that pain, I would be betraying the memory of my friends left behind. Every time the woman told me something that sounded like hope, I felt a strange anger, as if she were trying to rip away the last thing that still connected me to the past. It's a feeling hard to explain. You want to get better, but you're afraid of what you'll find if you actually do. In the United States, everyone talks about honor, about sacrifice, about the pride of service, the flags on balconies, the Memorial Day speeches, the halftime applause at NFL games honoring veterans. It all looks beautiful on the outside, but when you're alone in your room, staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, none of these tributes answer the questions burning inside. Why did I survive and others didn't? Why do I deserve a second chance when they didn't? This was the hidden truth that haunted me, and I hid it from everyone, including her. There were days when I'd enter the shelter determined to remain silent. I'd sit in the corner, cross my arms, and try to isolate myself, but somehow she always found me. She didn't force me to speak, but remained there as if to say, I'm not going anywhere. This irritated me more than I'd like to admit. I felt like getting up and leaving, escaping that gaze that seemed to see what I didn't want to show. There was one afternoon when, unable to contain myself, I snapped. I told her she had no idea what I'd seen, that nothing she said would change what happened. I waited for her to take offense or leave, but she just took a deep breath, looked at me, and said, You're right. I don't know what you saw, but I know what it's like to lose someone and think they'll never smile again. Those words stuck in my mind. I wanted to remain angry, but I couldn't. Deep down, I knew she understood more than she let on. She'd already told me about the son she'd lost, about the emptiness left in the house after the accident. There was truth in her gaze, and it dismantled me. I spent the rest of that day in silence, but this time it was different. It wasn't a silence of distance. It was the silence of someone digesting something important. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this internal conflict was what kept me trapped between two versions of myself. On one side, the man who survived the war, who carries invisible scars and feels he must remain broken to honor those who are gone. On the other side, the man who begins to see a possibility of life after the pain, but fears losing what remains of his connection to the past. It was like being in the middle of a bridge without the courage to take the next step. The nights were the hardest. I would wake with the sound of helicopters still in my head, the the taste of dust in my mouth, my heart racing as if I were back at the front. At those times, I would remember her conversations and feel something strange. Part of me wanted to cling to those memories like a life raft, but another part wanted to throw them away. It was a constant battle between self-preservation and surrender. I wondered if I would ever have the courage to forgive myself. This process of resistance wore me down, but it also taught me something. Every time I freaked out, pulled away, wanted to give up, she remained steadfast, showing me without words that I wasn't alone. It was as if she were holding open a door, waiting for me to walk through it in my own time. This made me uncomfortable because I wasn't used to that kind of patience. In the world I came from, hesitation could cost someone their life. There, everything was a quick black and white decision. Here, I was learning that healing takes time, that not every battle is won by rushing. There was a day when I almost didn't go to the shelter. The rain was pouring down outside and I considered staying in my room, wrapped in a blanket. But something made me get up and go anyway. When I arrived, she was there, waiting for me with that same serene smile. And in that moment I felt a tightness in my chest as if something inside me was saying, "You don't have to fight this." It was a simple thought, but it resonated with me. I realized that the resistance I carried was preventing me from seeing what was right in front of me, the chance to start over. And that's when the anger began to transform into something else. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly I allowed those words to find a place within me. I learned that it's not about forgetting, but about deciding to live in a way that honors those left behind. And, little by little, the weight began to become less suffocating. Write down, "I've fought with myself." I want to see if you've also gone through this silent battle between what you feel and what you know you need to do to move forward. That day, the shelter was more crowded than usual. The sound of conversations in the background mingled with the metallic clang of cutlery on trays, and the smell of hot soup filled the air. I sat in the same corner as always, unwilling to interact, trying to go unnoticed. But she arrived, as she always did, with the same calm stride and serenity that seemed to defy the chaos around her. Only this time, there was something different about her. Her eyes, normally serene, held a more intense glow, as if she had something important to say. She placed the cloth bag on the floor, sat beside me, and before even beginning to knit, placed her hand on mine. That gesture took me by surprise. It wasn't invasive, but firm. It was as if she were saying, "Pay attention, this is important." She took a deep breath as if carrying an old memory that needed to be spoken. Then, in a slightly lower voice than usual, she began to talk about her husband. Until that moment, I only knew she was a widow, but I had never heard the details. She said he was sent to Vietnam, a young man full of life and dreams, and that he returned years later with his body intact, but his soul in pieces. She said that for years, he became a stranger in his own home. He would spend hours silently on the porch, staring into space, unable to laugh at his children's jokes or celebrate the family's small achievements. I spent a decade living next to a man who was there physically, but who had already given up on the inside, she said, her eyes welling up. Those words pierced me like a sharp knife. It was impossible not to see myself in the portrait she was describing. I too had spent hours staring at the ceiling, avoiding conversation, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. What startled me was when she told me how the story ended. "One day he couldn't take it anymore and decided to leave for good," she said, looking straight into my eyes. She didn't need to explain what she meant. The heavy silence that followed spoke for her, and it was there, in that pain-filled pause, that something inside me broke. I felt a tear fall, unable to contain it, and for the first time I didn't try to hide it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because it was at that precise moment that something inside me began to change irreversibly. I realized I was following the same path as her husband, sinking into silence, isolating myself, letting guilt and fear slowly engulf me. And seeing her pain decades later made me realize the impact my choices could have not only on me, but on everyone around me. That story wasn't just about him, it was about me, about the future I would have if I continued to feed my own prison. She then squeezed my hands and said, "I couldn't save you, no matter how much I wanted to, but maybe you still have a chance. Not for me, not for others, but for you." These words hit me like a revelation. For the first time, I felt like the decision to allow myself to live again was in my hands, and that no one could make it for me. It was as if the world around me went silent for a few seconds. The sound of the trays, the voices, and the wind outside disappeared. Only those words echoed in my mind. I left the shelter that night with a strange feeling, as if I were carrying something new. The cold of the street seemed different, almost welcome. The streetlights created patterns on the wet asphalt, and for the first time in a long time, I observed them unhurriedly, as if every detail held meaning. I walked slowly, breathing deeply, feeling the cold air enter my lungs, and I realized that I was alive, really alive, and that this might still have a purpose. In the days that followed, I began searching for that look in hers, the one that reminded me I had a choice. I still had relapses, still had days when anger and sadness overwhelmed me, but something was different. I didn't want to lose myself anymore. I started talking more, telling stories I'd never told anyone. Some made me cry mid-sentence, others made me laugh at things I thought I'd never find funny again. And she listened to it all, unhurriedly, without trying to fix me, just holding the space so I could exist again. This phase was like crossing a turbulent river. I felt vulnerable, as if every word were an exposed wound. But at the same time, there was something liberating about it. It was a painful journey, but one that gradually made me feel whole again. I began to realize that I didn't have to carry the weight of everything I'd experienced alone. And this realization was a turning point. It was as if someone had turned on a light in a place where I had learned to live in the dark. What struck me most was the way she spoke of her husband, not with resentment or bitterness, but with a kind of quiet respect. He wasn't weak, she once said. He just lost his way and no one could bring him back. These words made me understand that seeking help isn't a sign of weakness but of courage, that acknowledging pain is the first step to letting it go. Write down, I felt this light come on. I want to know if you too have ever had a moment when something or someone brought clarity to a path that seemed impossible to see. The morning after that conversation that changed everything, I woke up different. The ceiling was still the same, the cold in the room was still the same, but something inside me felt less heavy. It was as if a small crack had opened in the midst of all that internal chaos and light had managed to enter. I got up more slowly, took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time I didn't feel that crushing pressure in my chest. The path to the shelter seemed less dark. The leafless trees, typical of winter here in the United States, no longer seemed so threatening. I looked at them and thought that, even bare and seemingly dead within them, life was preparing to return in spring. That image stayed with me for the rest of the day. At the shelter, I sat in the same spot as always, but this time I chose to sit near the window. I wanted to see the street, see people passing by, feel that there was still movement in the world. She arrived as she always did, with that steady, serene stride, and when she sat down next to me, I didn't look away. I didn't need words to make her understand that something had changed. She smiled discreetly, as if she knew the transformation was beginning to take hold. We talked about simple things at first: the weather, the soon-to-arrive snow, the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen, but deep down, I felt like each word was a brick rebuilding something inside me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is where the real journey begins. I realized I was faced with a choice. I could go back to being the man who hid in corners, who ran away from any kind of affection or hope, or I could allow myself to take small steps toward a different life. It wasn't a magical decision. It was a process. Some days I felt an overwhelming urge to lock myself in my room and not see anyone. But on others, I woke up with a strength I didn't recognize and was able to face the world outside. It was as if each day were a silent battle, and little by little I was winning more battles than I lost. I remember the first day I could actually laugh. It was because of a silly story one of the other men at the shelter told, something about the mess he made while trying to cook. I laughed out loud without thinking, and everyone looked at me. I felt my face flush, but the woman next to me smiled as if she'd been waiting for that moment since the day we met. That laugh was a turning point. It was as if the sound had shattered the last remaining piece of ice inside me. I started getting more involved. Little by little, I started helping serve coffee, organizing blankets, greeting new arrivals. One day, I saw a young man sitting alone exactly as I used to, and without thinking twice, I sat next to him. I didn't say anything for a few minutes, just sat there, present. He looked at me askance, suspicious, and I smiled in a way that said, "I know what it's like to be there." That was powerful for me because I realized I was reproducing the same gesture that brought me back to life. It was as if I had been given a torch and could now pass it on to someone else. This was the great revelation. The pain that had nearly destroyed me was transforming into something that could light someone else's path. It was a silent, but purposeful transformation. I still had difficult memories, I still had nightmares, but they no longer controlled me as they once had. They became memories that reminded me of where I came from but didn't determine where I was going. This shift in mindset was liberating. I realized that honoring my fallen comrades didn't mean living in eternal suffering, but choosing to live in a way they would be proud of if they were still here. The seasons began to change, and with them, I changed too. The first snow fell, covering everything in white, and I stared out the window for a while, feeling something closing and something new about to begin. It was as if the world was showing me that after winter, spring always comes. And deep inside, I felt spring was coming. This transformation wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. My body felt lighter, my step firmer. I slept better, with fewer jolts. Some nights were still difficult, but now I had an anchor. I remembered her words, the way she held my hands, and it helped calm my heart. It was as if she had planted something in me that grew day by day. And then came the day she told me, "You know you don't have to stay here to hide anymore. You can stay because you want to, or you can leave and take all this with you." That was a revelation. I realized the shelter had ceased to be just a place of refuge and had become a place of rebirth. And in that moment, I knew I was ready to take the next step, even though I didn't know exactly what that would be. Write down, "I'm ready to start over." I want to know if you've ever felt that moment when, even without having all the answers, you decided to take the first step towards a new life. Sometimes a hug or a stranger's words are all we need to live again. I never imagined that someone I didn't even know would be the one to remind me that life wasn't over, that I still had something to give to the world. Every conversation, every gesture from that woman was like a missing piece in rebuilding something inside me that I thought was lost forever. It's strange to think about, but often it's outsiders, who weren't there when it all happened, who can see more clearly what we can't see alone. They help us realize that, no matter how painful the path has been, the destination can still be different if we decide to change direction. I began to understand that transformation isn't a single event, but a sequence of small choices we make every day. Choosing to stand up, choosing to look at someone and respond with a smile, choosing not to hide from my own history. This shift in mindset made me realize I had more control over my future than I imagined. And it's not about ignoring the past, but about learning to use it as fuel to create something new. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is a revelation that may seem simple, but changes everything when it truly sinks into your heart. I realize that every person we cross paths with has the potential to be part of this journey. Here in the United States, we have this culture of saying thank you for your service to veterans, but we don't always think about what happens after that. I learned that the true honor we can give to those who served, and to ourselves, is to live in a way that gives meaning to the pain we've experienced. It's transforming suffering into strength, loss into learning, and using that to help others still trapped in the darkness. This story is proof that even behind the scenes where no one is filming or applauding, it's possible to find meaning and start over. It's not easy, and it will often hurt more before it gets better, but it's in this place of vulnerability that hope truly arises. Each step I took out of the hole I was in was small, sometimes almost imperceptible, but together they formed a path, and that path has brought me here, to tell you this story. If this story touched you in any way, if you saw yourself in any part of it, leave a simple phrase in the comments that resonates in your heart, like, "I choose to live," or any word that represents how you're feeling right now. I want to read it, and know if this message resonated with you too, because that's how we create a community of people who support and strengthen each other. And if this story touched you, please like it, and help this message reach those who may need it right now. Your interaction makes all the difference in helping more people find this content and feel the same hope you felt here. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this story spoke directly to you. So take advantage of this moment and leave a like, because it helps this kind of message reach those who also need to hear something like it. And if you want to continue walking with me on this journey of inspiring and thought-provoking stories, subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss our next meetings here. Write in the comments, "This message was for me," just so I know you stuck with me until the end and that this conversation resonated with you. And since you're here, there's a video on the side that complements this topic, and will delve even deeper into this reflection. Click and stay with me there.